It certainly is serious, and I myself have been madly checking to see when the last time a missile actually flew over Japan. I believe it was maybe way back in 1998 where Pyongyang actually shot something that went over the same basic area of Japan and then landed in the Pacific Ocean. There may have been something similar to that recently, but I'd have to go back and check. But certainly, anytime you're shooting something over a country, especially missiles that may not be that accurate and that have a tendency to break apart in midair, even if the North Koreans are not intending to hit anything in Japan, simply the fact that they're sending a missile in that direction certainly is a large risk, and I'm sure the Japanese are taking it very seriously.
Could this be unintentional? Could this be a rocket launch that's gone wrong?
I doubt it. They seem to have gotten pretty good at least shooting in the right direction, getting the loft correct to make sure that they're not sending it further than they want to. So I would doubt that this was unintentional in the sense of it being a missile that they wanted to fire over Japan. But again, anytime you have that type of projectile flying over territory, the danger of it coming down, whether they want it to or not, in the wrong place is quite high.
Okay, Scott, let's take it as intentional then. What is the signal that Kim Jong-un is sending here in the face of mounting pressure from China, from the United States, from a host of world powers?
Well, we've been saying for quite some time that despite all of the diplomatic, economic, political, and military pressures on Kim Jong-un, that he is determined to show defiance in the face of all of this international pressure. His economy is allowing him to have more of a cushion than was the case with his father or grandfather, meaning that he has more resources at his disposal even under pressure. And he really feels like acquiring a viable ICBM is the only way to ensure the survival of his regime. So this is just one more example of Kim Jong-un saying that whatever the world wants to try to stop me on this pathway, I'm going to race ahead.
And Scott, I mean, given the real and serious downsides of any conflict, military conflict with North Korea, and I guess top of mind is the threat of North Korea shelling across the DMZ large parts of Seoul, South Korea. With that threat in mind, what, if anything, could or should the rest of us in the civilized world do in response to these kinds of provocations?
It's very, very difficult, and the military options, as you alluded to, are extremely limited, and none of them really make us think that the outcome would be good, especially since there's such a risk of escalation on either side. So Seoul and people in South Korea have been living with this threat for decades, of course, and then more recently, as North Korea's capabilities have become more enhanced, other parts of Northeast Asia, Japan in particular, have come under threat. And then most recently, we have Kim Jong-un threatening to shoot missiles into waters off Guam, in addition to trying to develop an ICBM that can reach the continental United States. So it is not a good situation for any of the parties involved. Kim Jong-un likely knows that in a conflict he would lose and his regime would be wiped away. But the problem is that even if that happens, there's a lot of his military that can continue fighting, and it could escalate out of control even if he doesn't intend it to happen that way.
So Scott, I mean, in a sense, are our hands tied here? Are we powerless in the face of, I mean, let's face it today, North Korea fired a missile over one of the world's most advanced first world economies, and they seem to be doing it with impunity.
Again, the risks of a conflict really make everyone pause before responding to these chronic provocations. There is more room for additional sanctions. We know that the U.S. is working in close cooperation with South Korea and Japan, and is definitely talking with China to ensure that China is doing its utmost to cooperate as well with the sanctions regime. But the reality is that there are few options available to actually stop him, which means we may be on a pathway where eventually the world will have to recognize North Korea as a de facto nuclear power. It doesn't mean anyone's going to allow that to happen without doing their utmost to stop it along the way, but that is a pathway that presents a particular risk.